but we're just going to start the last line on the bottom of the Beis on the base. So the Mishnah says that when Kaiso went out to war, the Kayin, the Mashloach Muhammad, would give a speech beforehand, and he would say, Ki Hashem alekeichem hoylech imachem lilachem lachem. That Kodesh Baruch Hu is going with you, imachem, he's amongst you, to fight for you. So says the Gemara, v'chol kach lama, what does it mean that Hashem was with you? Hashem v'chol kinuyav Menachem ba'aron. That Hashem and all the names of Hashem, all different names of Hashem, were written on the luchais in the aron. So that was what it was referring to when it says Hashem was going with you amongst you, not just Hashem is, in a more of a literal sense that Hashem is with you. The Chenu Aimer, we find the same thing, that the aron went with Klal Yisrael when they went out to war. By the pasuk by Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu sent out Klal Yisrael to fight the Midyanim, Vayishlach Oisam Moshe elef lamata letzava Oisam ves Pinchas. Moshe Rabbeinu sent out 1,000 for each shevet, and he sent them out, and he sent Pinchas. Oisam, what is Oisam referring to? Elo Sanhedrin. Those are referring to the Sanhedrin, were the people that were chosen to be the warriors of that war. Pinchas, Zeh Meshach Mechama. Pinchas was referring to, he's the Meshach Mechama. And the pasuk continues with the Kli HaKodesh. What was the Kli HaKodesh referring to? Zeh Aron v'Luchais Shabai. That was the Aron and the Luchais that were inside of it. That's in that pasuk. And the pasuk continues with Chatzaitzais HaTruah. Elu HaShofars. That was the shofars that Klal Yisrael brought out with them when they went to do battle with Midian. Tana. Now, it was a very important reason why Pinchas was chosen and was the one that went out for battle. He went to pay back a debt that was due to him, his family, because of his mother's father. Shneamar, as the pasuk says, by Mechiras Yosef, the Midyanim were the people who sold Yosef HaTzadik down to Mitzrayim. So therefore, Pinchas was a descendant of Yosef. Therefore, his mother's father was from Yosef. Therefore, he was going back to get them back for that sale. Ask the Gemara, remember the Pinchas Yosef Asi? Does that mean that Pinchas comes from Yosef? Elazar ben Aaron lokach loy b'mres Putiel loy Elisha. Elazar, Pinchas' father, who is the son of Aaron, his wife was b'nais Putiel. What does Putiel mean? My love, the Asi mi Yisrael. That's referring to, he came from Yisrael. Shapitem agom la'avodas kachavim. He fattened cows to shach them to the avodas kachavim. That's B'nais Putiel, from the children of Putiel, the daughters of Putiel. So you see, he came from Yisrael. So how can we say they came from Yosef? And so the Gemara, Loi mi Yosef shepitbeit b'Yitzrei, that he was mezalzel. He made a joke of his Yetzahara because he was able to overcome it. That's what B'nais Putiel means. So ask the Gemara, the Shvatim, after Pinchas killed Zimri, Pinchas killed him, and the Shvatim were sort of bothering him. That he says, "Re'isem ben puti zeh shepitem avi imay agam avodas kachavim yaharig nasim Yisrael." You see, this person, his descendants, his ancestors are people who used to serve avodah zarah, and this person now goes and kills a nasi in Yisrael. So they were bothering him. So you see that he really did come from Yisrael. Ella iavu de'ime, answers the Gemara, iavu de'ime, if his mother's father mi Yosef, ime de'ime, his mother's mother mi Yisrael, mi ime de'ime mi Yosef, his mother's mother was from Yisrael, avu de'ime, his father's mother mi Yisrael. Tekenami deksiv mi b'nais Putiel, there's an extra yud there, trei mashma shmamina. So he came from both of them. His maternal lineage was both from Yosef and from Yisrael. Now, the Ben Yada explains that when the Shvatim were bothering him about this, they said that, you see this person, he comes from such lineage. What they were really referring to is that every time someone does something, even if it's true lahalacha and he's right, he was correct and he did that, you have to see where something's coming from. Sometimes the things that nudge us, that push us in a certain direction, may not be such kosher places. So you see, the fact that somebody can come to killing another Jew, it's not as, even though he was correct in that, but how could another Jew kill another Jew? Aaron HaKohen was shalom, he was peace. Aaron HaKohen would never have offsprings that would be able to come to, you just wouldn't be able to kill someone, even if you are right. So where's it coming from? It's coming from a bad place. It's coming from people that used to serve avodah zarah. So they're alluding to this fact that even though you may be right, but at the end of the day, you come from your ancestors serve Avodah Zarah. So we have to be very careful when we may do something that even if it's true and we're correct in halacha, you have to know what influence our decision. Meaning, is it the Torah that's influencing us, or is it secular influences that are influencing us to want to do something? Even if we ask a rabbi and the rabbi says it's mutter, still we have to know where it's coming from. Because you see, it was a Chaim, and that's why the pasuk specifically had to miyachas him. He gave his lineage from Aaron HaKohen, that no, he comes from Aaron HaKohen, and also from Yosef, because Yosef, since he came over his Yetzer Hara, it was very burned. His desire to not do znus was very strong in the family of Yosef. So therefore, the Torah was miyachas. He gave his lineage to where it was.
People still have the tiny, even though he asked Moshe Rabbeinu. Even though he reminded him of the halacha.
He asked him, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Do as whatever you want. Don't." They said Moshe Rabbeinu didn't really answer. He said, "But if you remember, then you do it."
So you remember the halacha.
So you do it. So he didn't tell him what to do, but still, he came up with the idea. They say that Hakam Yisrael was the first person that came up with the idea, to make so many different levels of people. No one could have figured that out. The Jews are very smart people. Right? Why don't anyone figure that? The reason is, they say, because only a guy could decide to not speak to Moshe Rabbeinu. Give up the opportunity to speak to Moshe Rabbeinu? Who's going to give up that opportunity? No one's going to figure that out. Only a guy says, "No, listen, it makes no sense what you're doing over here." Okay, at the end of the day, only a guy can think about that. Okay, says the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah is continuing the different speeches that happened. The pasuk continues that there are certain people that are exempted from the war, and they could go back from serving on the battlefront. There are certain exemptions of a person who builds one of them is a person who builds a house. A person who built a new house and did not inaugurate it, he did not move into his new house yet, he is allowed to return home. And it says the Mishnah, whether he builds a house that is used to store straw, or to have his cattle inside, or his wood, or it was a stored wine and oils, all those would allow him, would give him the exemption of serving on the battle. Whether he builds it or whether he buys it, or he inherits it, whether he acquires it as a gift, receives it as a gift. All those people would be exempted from serving in the army. Who is a person who planted a new vineyard and was not mechalet. The halacha is that the first 3 years of any fruit tree, it's always arla. The 4th year, by all fruit trees or just by a vineyard, but the 4th year, it's called neter revai or kerem revai. You would have a status of Ma'aser Sheni. The crop of that year would have a status of Ma'aser Sheni, and you would bring it up to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. And if it was too much food and you couldn't bring everything up, or you might afraid it might spoil on the way there, so you would be mechal, you would redeem all these fruits onto money. So therefore, that's you did not yet get that 4th year's crop. So those people also would not be required to serve in the war. Whether he plants a vineyard, whether he plants 5 fruit-bearing trees, even though it's 5 different species. Whether he plants it, whether he is the mavrich is the action of when you would take a tree and you would bend over the top of it or any branch and plant it into the ground, and then after it would take root, you would snip it and it would produce another tree, and you gained that you were more the chances of your sapling surviving was much better, because till it took its root and it developed its own root system, you would be able to still take the nutrients from the original tree. So that was called mavrich. I think it's translated as layering. I guess that's the word to use. Whether you grafted a new shoot, all those things would be included in planting a new vineyard. Whether you buy or you get an inheritance, you receive it as a gift. All those people would be able to go back. Who is a person who is engaged to a woman? Obviously, doesn't mean just engaged. It means that he actually had kedushin. He's married, halachically married to this lady. Yet he didn't do nesuin yet. He's not fully married. He's in that between stage. Echad Amaris Besula, whether you're engaged to a Besula of Echad Amaris as Almana, or you are engaged to a widow. Afilu Shemeres Yavam. Even if you are on the status right now of a Shemeres Yavam, that a brother had died and you are waiting to either do Yibum Mechlitza, that status, you also would be able to go back. Afilu Shama Shemes Achad B'Melchama. Even if you heard that this person was already on the battlefront and he heard that his brother died, he's allowed to return home from battle. All these people would listen to the words of the Chaim, and then they would return from the border. This was happening at the border of Eretz. So before they actually went, it wasn't actually at the battle, it was by the border. At the border they would have this big speech and they would return. And these people, though they continued assisting in the war effort, they would fix up the roads and they would become the supply lines, bringing the food to all the people that were at the battle. And the reason for this, that they were still required to assist in the war effort, was because if you have people that went through basic training with you, and then some of them end up going home and go back to their houses and sit on the recliner and smoke a pipe, it will be very hard for the other people to continue doing the battle, knowing that they could have easily gotten themselves out of all this work by making up some sort of excuse. So therefore we require anyone that came with them to the border and was part of the speech, we require them to assist in the war effort, so we shouldn't make the other people that are going out to battle feel bad or have a little bit regret that they didn't find some excuse to get out of it also.
Are they obligated to leave, or is it just they're permitted to leave?
No, they're required to leave. Because the reasons why we require these people to leave is because we're afraid, as we'll see in Neshama also, any person that may be concerned, we're afraid these people have too many daigas in their mind. They're thinking about their investments, their money, all their things. We're afraid that they're not going to want to do in the battle because they're afraid that they may die in the battle and they may not see any results or any of their results from all their profit from all their investments. So therefore, these people are scared and they're not such good soldiers. So therefore, we send them out. We actually want them to leave.
So things that you mentioned in terms of the Yivam, if he's planning to do chalitza, he still goes back, or it's only when he's DAF planning to go back to do?
I assume that I didn't see anywhere else. I assume that. I mean, if he knows for sure he's doing chalitza, he's. I'm not sure. Meaning, let's say a case that he has to do chalitza. A case where he has to do chalitza, I'm not sure. I don't know. I would assume that unless he has certain. If he could, either way, then I'm assuming he can go back. But if he, that's my guess. If he has to do chalitza, in case we learned about Nivamas, the case that he has to do chalitza, then maybe he would not go with Rabbi. I don't know though. There are certain people that do not have an exemption of building a house. What is that? Of all these cases, actually. If he builds a gatehouse, achsadra, or he like a little room in the front of his house, like a mud room where he could store his things. If he builds a porch, or hanoite arba ilone meichel, if he only plants 4 fruit-bearing trees, because that doesn't constitute an orchard or a kerem, the chamishin l'israk, or 5 non-fruit-bearing trees, or a machjas kushase, someone returns his divorced wife because it has to be a new woman to him. Amana l'kain gadol, or the next mission is now going to list all a bunch of isurim, that people that are married but isur, that those people also don't have the exemption to return. Amana l'kain gadol, gush v'chutz l'kain hedyet, or gush v'chutz to a regular kain, mamzeres v'nesina l'Yisrael. These are all usher to be married. Bas Yisrael l'mamzer v'lanitan lo yochayzer. All these people who are married be'isser will not be allowed to return. Even a person who rebuilds his house got destroyed. He destroyed and he rebuilt the exact same house. He didn't add anything onto it. That's also not considered a bayis chadash, not considered a new house. So he too would not be able to return. There was the Sharon was an area where the ground was not so strong, I guess, and a brick house there would need to be repaired constantly, twice every 7 years. So such a house would not be considered such a good house. I guess you weren't so nervous if you lost that investment. It wasn't probably such a big investment. You probably weren't going to have it so long anyways. Now the Mishnah says there are certain people that were not even required to go out to the border and be part of this big rally and divide everyone up. There are certain people that were not required to leave their house at all. if he built a new house and he inaugurated it, that he moved into his house, yet he did not finish off the first year, he was living in it for less than a year, not the kerem v'chiloi, he actually got through that fourth year, he was mechal already, but he didn't yet see his first crop. I guess it's referring to the fifth year's crop, really. Hanoi says, if he actually marries his wife in the first year of marriage, or he marries his yivama, shnemar, as the pasuk says, Naki yela beisa shana achas. He should be free in his house 1 year. The Mishnah Darshans refers to his house. Years karma, years referring to his vineyard. The continuation of the pasuk is he should gladden his wife. Zu ishtay, that's referring to his wife. Asher lokach, even the one he took. Lahavi es yivimtay. It's included in his yivama. And these people, they are not even required to assist in any of the war efforts. They stay home. They can enjoy themselves. Tana Rabbana. Now, the Gemara is now going to darshan. There was 3 speeches that were given. The one speech was which we learned about on DAF Ben Beis, which was a chizuk shmuz, talking about how Hashem is going to be with you. The next one was our Mishnah, giving pturim to people who build houses or are engaged or build karems. And the next Mishnah is the Mishnah on DAF Mem Daled. It's talking about someone that's scared, he can go back, he has virus maybe, and it's also telling everybody that you should just know that once you go out to war and you decide to turn yourself around, there will be people there with clubs who are going to beat you up to make sure you stay at the war. So there was 3 speeches that happened, and there's different psukim that we darshan. What happens to each? The psukim of saying each one. Tana Rabbanan, v'dibra shaitim, that's the first words in our Mishnah, is v'dibra shaitim, and it's referring to our Mishnah. Yachol dvarim shel atzman, we might think that this is referring to the actual words the shaitim were saying, the officers would say, which is really the next Mishnah, when talking about that they're going to enforce deserters. Kishu Aimer v'yasfu hashaitim, when the shaitim will add on and say over, hari dvarim shel atzman, because these are referring to the psukim where each thing is said in the Torah. Because that already is referring to what the shaitim say. So what are we going to say when the pasuk says v'divra shaitim is our Mishnah? We're referring to what the Meshulach Muhammad. This our Mishnah was the Meshulach Muhammad. The Kohen was speaking about this. Okay, Tzad. So how do we say? Who was speaking at this point? Was the Chaim or the Meshulach Muhammad? Was the Chaim that was the Meshulach Muhammad speaking, or was the Shaitim, or the officer speaking? Chaim medaber v'shaitim hashmiya. The Chaim would speak, and the Shaiter, an officer, would amplify his voice and be able and repeat it so everyone will be able to hear. Tani Chada. We have 3 brises that seem to contradict each other. Tani Chada. Kain medaber v'shaitim hashmiya. One brise says that the Kain would speak and the officer would amplify it. V'tani idach kain medaber v'kain hashmiya. We have another brise that says that the Kain would speak and the Kain would amplify it. V'tani idach, another brise would say, it says shaitim medaber v'shaitim hashmiya. The officer would speak and there would be an officer amplifying it. Omer Rabbi hakeitzad. So how do we work out these 3 different brises? V'nogash v'yad v'dibra koyin. These are the psukim. V'nogash was the pasuk for that the Mishnah brought on DAF Mem Beis. It says v'nogash. Where's the place here? Okay, I can find it. That's the pasuk of referring to when you would say, "Don't be afraid," because the chizuk shmuz. Until the Dibra Shaitrim, which is our mission over here, that was Kain Medaber Kain Mashmiya. That was when it was completely the Kohanim speaking. V'dibru Adis v'yasfu, from the beginning of our Mishnah until v'yasfu was the pasuk for the next Mishnah. Kain Medaber Shaitim Mashmiya. There was a Kain speaking, and the Shaiter the officer would amplify it. V'yasfu ve'elach, from the last part, from the Yasfu, the last pasuk, and the next Mishnah, Shaitim Medaber Shaitim Mashmiya. Then would be just the officers speaking it, and the officer would amplify it. Now the Gemara is going to darshan exactly how we know that all these things are included, exactly what parts of building a house, and so forth, going through the Mishnah. From the Mishnah, from the pasuk, we only know somebody who actually builds a house. How do we know to include all the other cases of buying or inheriting or receiving as a gift? We have a Rabbi of Miha Ish. We have a Rabbi to tell you, including those cases also. Asher bana bias. Someone who builds a house. The pasuk says builds a house. Ein li'ela bias. That refers only to a house. Minayin l'Rabbi beis hateva and beis habakar, to include a house for straw, a house for cattle, or beis ha'eitzim, or beis ha'itzaros, or a house for wood, or a storage shed. Tam lemer asher bana mikol makom. Anything that was built, asher bana, says anything that was built does not imply specifically a house. You might thought to include to include also a gatehouse or an enclosed a porch or this enclosed room outside your house. Tamaloymar bias has to be a house. Ma bias aroy ladira, just as a house is you're able to live in it. Af kol aroy ladira, everything has to have the ability to live in it, even though you were not specifically living in these places, but nonetheless it had the ability to be lived in case of need. Whereas these other cases, a gatehouse or a porch, you really couldn't live in it even if you wanted to. Rabbi ben Yaakov says that it's specifically only a house and nothing else is included, or none of these other woodsheds or storage houses would be included. It would only be a bias. Now the pasuk says, the pasuk does not say v'lo chinech, rather it says v'lo chinchoi. He did not inaugurate it. So there's a miyut, it's referring to something specific. Prat legazlan is excluding somebody who stole a house. Lema de like Rabbi Glili. Let's say this is not like Rabbi Glili. Why? Rabbi Glili is going to say in the next Mishnah, someone who's faint at heart. Someone who's concerned about the averos that he has, because since he's afraid he might not have the zechusim that will have the ability to continue on living during the war. So therefore he should also go back to his house. So this guy, if he stole a house, he's obviously got some averos that he should be concerned about, that he may not have the zechusim to survive the war. So you would not need a specific pasuk to be mamayit and telling you that excluding a gazlan. And so the Gemara, we could say it's even Rabbi Glili, going to Ovid Shuva v'Yohav Demei. He did Shuva already, he paid for this house. So since he paid for it already, so therefore he doesn't have any averos anymore, he would still be able to be at the war. So why do you need a pasuk? So he asks the Gemara, so therefore he's considered that he bought the house already. Why does he have to go back? Why does he stay out at war? He should go back. And so the Gemara, since originally the way he acquired it was through stealing, therefore even if he subsequently buys it and pays for it, he still will not have the heter of buying a house, and you would have to stay out at the war. Who is a person who built who planted a vineyard? Someone who plants it. That's only referring to someone who plants it. How do you know to include buying or inheriting or receiving as a gift? Is a rebay of miha'ish. Ashenata kerem, someone who plants a vineyard. Ein li'ela kerem, that's only referring to a vineyard. Minayin l'rabis chamisha ilani ma'achel va'afilu mishar minim. How do you know to include 5 fruit trees and even different species? Tamalaymer ashenata, someone who plants it. It's including everything, not only grapevines. You may have thought to include also 4 fruit trees or 5 non-fruit bearing trees. Tam Lemer Karen, the pasuk says Karen, so it has to be the minimal, at least, of an orchard or a vineyard, and the minimum shear is 5. It's specifically a vineyard, and nothing else would get you out of going to war. Now the pasuk does not say v'loi chilil. Rather it says v'loi chililoi. It has an exclusion that only certain cases are you have the heter of leichin, not that you didn't get to that stage of the 4th year. Prat, it's excluding l'mavrik or l'markiv, excluding somebody who did this action of layering or someone who grafted it. For ask the Gemara, we learned in our Mishnah that those things are sufficient enough for you to have a heter to go back to exempt you from the war. Our Mishnah is referring to a case when you grafted it be-heter. It was a permitted case, like you grafted an apple tree on an apple tree. And kavas heter, kavas iser, when you grafted a species which was not mutter to graft together, even though you were allowed to eat the subsequent fruit from that graft, but you're not allowed to do it originally. Now, that is the way I just explained was how Rashi explains that the Isser and Heter is referring to when you did it Isser, you did a grafting which was Asser, you did a grafting which was Mutter. Now, the problem really is, one of the kashas there are a lot of kashas really in Rashi's Pshat, but one of the questions is that he didn't answer yet how you have Mavrach. Mavrach is a layering scenario where you plant an area. So where exactly do you have an Isser? Where does that exist that we would have asked you to do such a case? So the Bereshit explains that the Rambam has another pshat. The Kesef Mishnah explains in the Rambam that the Rambam learns that the Isser and the Heter refers to if there's still a status of Arla on these fruits, or there's no longer a status of Arla on the fruits. Any fruits that would have a status of Arla would be considered Isser, so it has the Isser of Arla. Anything which does not have a Heter of Isser of Arla, it's Heter, it's mutter fruits already. The crop is going to be mutter. That would be mutter, and it actually fits very well with the rest of the Gemara. A lot of things just fits very nicely. But we're going to learn with Rashi's learning that it's you did it in an aser fashion or a mutter fashion. What is the case that we're talking about? That you did something, you did a grafting in a mutter fashion that you will be allowed to go back from the war. If you grafted a small sapling in a small sapling, so you originally you have the original sapling, the original tree that you planted already over there. So you'll be able to return based on that original sapling. So therefore, you don't need to come onto a new heter of the fact that you grafted a new tree into it. You're already going back because of that original tree. Elos, the Gemara says, Yaakov is Kano. We have to be talking about a case when the host tree was a older tree already. Old tree, and you grafted a new branch into it. Ask the Gemara, that when you graft a new shoot into an old tree, it's bottle. It loses its identity as a new tree, and it gets the dinim, the halacha status of the old tree. And if the old tree is no longer subject to arla anymore, it's no longer considered an old tree. Therefore, the new tree is also not considered a new tree, and it also doesn't have any dini arla on it. So therefore, why would you be allowed to go back from the war? Why would you have to be exempted from serving in the army based on this tree that anyways has a status of the old tree? So it says we're really talking about a case of a new tree, a young tree, and a young tree. He planted, the original planting of this tree was either to plug up a hole in his fence, or he plans on getting wood out of this tree. He's planting a cherry tree to get some cherry wood out of it. We learned in the Mishnah, somebody plants a tree not for fruit-bearing purposes. It's not subjugated to the laws of Arla, and you'll be able to eat the fruits right away. So therefore, in this tree, it does not have the Dina Arla, and therefore, since it doesn't have the Dina Arla, if you plant it, even if you planted, let's say you decide to plant a nice row of cherry trees along your property as a thing, or you are working in the lumber business, you plant cherry trees in order to get the wood out of it, that would not have Arla, and you also would not be allowed to go back from the war based on the planting of these trees for lumber. So, but if you subsequently grafted a branch into these trees, so then it would have the halachas of Arla, and then you'd be allowed to go back from the war based on those new grafts that you put into it. Ask the Gemara, what's the difference that in a case when you grafted a young tree into an old tree, it loses identity as far as Arla is concerned, it loses identity, and it does not have the halach status of Arla when the host tree was an older tree. And in our case, when you planted it not for fruit-bearing purposes, there it does not lose identity, and it would have the halachic status of Arla if you plant in a new shoot or a new branch into this tree. Says the Gemara, Hasam imim lech aleh lav bas mahader. In the case when the host tree is an older tree, no matter what you think and what you may do, at least as before you uproot the tree, you cannot revert its status and give it a new status of Arla. But in our case, where we're talking about where the host tree was a tree that you planted not for fruit-bearing purposes, if you decide after 2 years, you decide, you know what, I'd rather keep these trees to produce a cherry crop. Right, so then it would be subjugated to the laws of Arla for the continuation of whatever year it's in. So if it's in the second year, you would have another year of Arla, and then you would have either Kerem Ravai or if you would have Netter Ravai on that year. So therefore, you could, in your das, with your machshava alone, you could change its status. But so therefore, when you put in this new shoot, it's not any worse than changing your mind on this original tree to become fruit-bearing. When you put this new graft in, you put it in for fruit-bearing purposes. It's the same thing as if you had fruit trees that grew by themselves in your backyard. We know that if you walk in your backyard, you see that there's a peach tree growing in your backyard. You say, "Oh, that would be very nice that I have it. I'd like to keep it to be able to have fruits out of it." So that also would have the halachas of arla in it. So therefore, this tree also you do not say it's bottle, and because it has this ability to switch off between having arla and not having arla. So ask the Gemara a question. Why did we say that this case was talking about this funny case where you planted it for not fruit-bearing purposes and you put a graft into it? Why don't we make the case? The Mishnah talking about a case when there was two owners. One person owned the host tree and one person owned the graft. The owner of the host tree is going to go back from the war based on his own tree, and the person that owns the graft is going back based on the owning of the graft part. A field owned by partners, you do not have the exemption of serving in the army, and you have to stay at the army. So therefore, since this tree is owned by two people, they would not be able to return because of it. Ask the Gemara, how come? What is the difference by a case when there's 5 brothers at war, one of them dies, the remaining 4 brothers could all return back from the battlefront, and that's definitely not all 4 of them are marrying this Yavama. So why are all 4 returning? And says the Gemara, Hasam kol chad v'chad karinim be'ishtoi. There, whichever one will subsequently end up marrying this woman, it will be considered ishtoi, his wife, his full-fledged wife. Hacha, by the case of shutvim, of partners in our field, on our tree, kol chad v'chad like karinim be'karmai. It's never going to be considered fully. He's not going to have sole ownership over this field, and therefore he doesn't have the heter to going back. Now the Gemara. The Gemara is going to say another case of what we could have said our Mishnah is talking about by you did the grafting with an Isser fashion. Now Rashi's Girsa is actually b'markiv, not b'mavrich. Mavrich is really that case of layering, but he's Girsa that it's markiv. You grafted a ilon b'yer, a tree into a vegetable. And the high Tana on this Tana that he holds that he holds as mutter to do such a thing. Who the Tanya Amavrich Ilam B'Yarek, somebody that grafts a tree with a Yarek, Rabbi Yishum ben Gamliel Matir Mishum Yehuda ben Gamda Ish Kfar Akoy. He matters it, he allows you to do it in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamda Ish Kfar Akoy, who's from Akoy. Mecham Oisim Mecham do not allow you to do that. They hold it's still an Isser of Kalayim, and you can't do that. Kiyasir of Dimi Amr Rabbi Yechanan, Hamani Rabbi Lezman Yaakovi. That other brisa, which we do not allow you to return based on the Isser, there's some sort of grafting that was done by Isser. So that it's not just the pshat is not that it's that you did it by Isser. Rather, that Mishnah is Rabbi Lezman Yaakov. Lezman Yaakov, who's Rabbi Lezman Yaakov? Loi Amr Lezman Yaakov Hasam Kerem Kamashma. Rabbi Lezman Yaakov was of the opinion that only specifically a kerem, a vineyard, is the only one that you have the ability to return for. Hacha nami neta kamashmai. It has to be a real planting. That means that even if you grafted a grapevine on a grapevine, you would not be able to return based on the grapevine because it's not a real planting. It has to be a real planting. Noite in mavrich u'markiv loy. Has to be a planting and not grafting or layering. Now the Gemara has a couple of members from Rav Dimi, the said name of Rabbi Yechanan, and the said name of Rabbi Lezman Yaakov. Now all these members, even though Rabbi Lezman Yaakov is a Tana and he was in Brisus, the Gemara has the ability to argue on these because these do not have the status of Brisus or Mishnais. They are a memra, Pia Shmua, that was passed down. That Rav Dimi seemed to know about them and he was telling everybody else about them. Yet it didn't have the status of a Brisus. So we'll see when the Gemara actually argues on one of these members. Ki aser v'dimi amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Yalda pechusa mitefach chayeves ba'arla kol shenaiseha. If you have a planting which is some sort of dwarf tree which is lower than a tefach and never gets higher than a tefach, so therefore it will be aser in arla its entire years. Why? The mechsi kibas shasa. It appears that this tree is a young tree. It's lower than a tefach. So this dwarf plant, this dwarf vine would not be allowed. You never have a heter of arla on it. The honey mealy, that's me aser shtayim keneg shtayim v'achas yatzonov. When you have the minimum share of a kerem, which is five vines. Aval kulei kerem kol islay. But if you have your entire large field full of these dwarf vines, that would be mutter because everybody knows and understands that this field is a different kind of species of grapevines. Another member, Ki Yasser of Dimi Amr Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, mace teifus arba amas l'Kriyas Shema. A mace, the halacha is that you're not allowed to say Kriyas Shema near a mace. Why? Diksiv lo yigul arash cherev oisehu. It's embarrassment to the person if you show him that he can't do mitzvahs and you can do mitzvahs. So the distance that you have to distance yourself from the mace is 4 amas. 4 amas. That's what he said in the name of husband Yaakov. You have 4 amas around the mace, not to say Kriyas Shema. Amr Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Chorgasa Hegdil ben Achim, a stepsister that grows up amongst stepbrothers. Asur li nasi la'achin. You are not allowed. This girl is not allowed to marry her stepbrothers, even though they're not related. Why? The michsi ki achsayu. It appears. It looks like she is their actual brothers, and people might think that they are marrying brothers and sisters allowed to marry each other. And so, but says the Gemara, "V'lohi, we do not pass like this." Karla islay lamilse. There's a koil about this, and that we're not concerned that people may think about that. So here's where we see that they're allowed to argue on these members because they didn't have the status of a brisa, of a mishnah. The halacha is that if you have leket, shichah, or peah, leket and shichah were the droppings that people, while they were harvesting the fields, they may have dropped individual stalks, or they may have dropped a complete bundle. So the aniyim were allowed to go pick up all those things and take them for themselves. And peah is the corner of the field that you leave over for the aniyim to harvest themselves. So those things are really pater for meiser. You're not mechuyev meiser. And if the ani takes them, you can eat it without taking chuvas meisers. But there's exam d'Rabbanan that if the ani gathered so much of them that he had an entire kri, an entire pile of them, so then we require him to take off chuvas meisers because it looks like he grew them himself and he's not taking chuvas meisers. Therefore, the Rabbanan required him to take off the chuvas meisers. Amar ula lo yamaran elo b'sada. This halacha that he's required to take off chuvas meisers is only if he made this big kri in the sada. But if he made this kri in his backyard in his house, Kol Islay Lamil say there's obviously people know that he did not grow this kri himself because nobody has a pile. If he has to sell a field, he would probably have done it in the field. So why did he do it in his backyard? Obviously, he gathered it from like a shiklam peah, and we know that's like it, and therefore we don't require him to take off the trumas amaisis. If you have this plant that's lower than a tefach high, it does not be mekadesh the zrayim. That is referring to klayim. That if you have planting in a klayim in a aser situation, so the klayim become aser ba'na. The lashon mekudesh is lashon when it becomes aser ba'na. So these things do not aser it and do not become aser ba'na. Now, obviously, we're talking about a case when it's klayim d'Rabbanan. It's not klayim d'Oraisa because the Rabbanan cannot. Rabbanan cannot say what time it could, what time it can't. If it's deraisa, obviously we're talking about a Rabbanan klayim where the Rabbanan could differentiate. This is only talking about when you have 5, the minimum shear, which is 5. But if you had an entire field of these grapevines, then even the Rabbanan we mask him to that would be klayim. Now, Rabbi specifically asked me to try to get to the 2 dots. Do we still have time for that? It's a little bit... Yeah? Okay. Mace tevis arba amis latuma. A mace is metama with the arba amis around him. Now, the halacha is usually a mace is only metama either with touching, with negiah, or if oil, you go over the mace. So really, next to you could stand within a hair's breadth of the mace. As long as no part of you is sticking over the mace, you really be tar. But the Rabbanan were geyser that 4 amis next to a mace is tamei also. And the reason for that is because they wanted to make a siyag, they wanted to distance yourself from the mace, so you should not by accident come and go over the mace. V'tana tuna, we have a brisa that says the same thing. Chotzer kever ha'in b'seichei tar. The way in those days they used to bury people was they would dig a cave and they would put people inside the cave in those little what are they called, the catacombs, in the cave there. So if he stood outside the cave in this entranceway to the cave, then he would be the tar. This chutzner, the courtyard outside the cave, has to be at least 4 amas to 4 amas wide, and then you'd be tar. But Basil says that as long as it's 4 tvachim wide, then it'll still be also kosher. When did Basil say that 4 tvachim wide is enough? If the opening is from the top, I mean the only way to get into this cave is to jump into this small 4x4 thing, or to climb out from this case. But if you had the opening from the side, meaning that there were steps leading down to this entrance, to this little chutzner, everyone would agree that you need to have 4 amas. Ask the Gemara, that's the Adarabba. The opposite would make sense. If he has steps to go down, he can be careful to walk down only on the steps and stay carefully, not go over the cave. But if he's required to climb in and climb out, it would be impossible for him to get in and out without by accident going over the cave. Elos says the Gemara, that which Beis Hill allows you to only have 4 tvachim, but 4 tvachim is if you have the Pesach from the side and you have steps leading down there. But if the opening was on top, arba amas, then you need arba amas. Now this is where we bring the raya that we have the same thing like we just said. That halacha is only true that you can go up until the entrance, so you can be very close to the kvarim, is only by a chatzar kever. The Messiah mechitzasa, because they clearly recognize the borders of where the mace and where the cave starts and ends. But a mace by himself would have the 4 amas, and that was the raya to what we said before.